The world was made of rust and rain. June knew this as a simple fact, like knowing that his breath would fog in the cold air or that the grav lifts would groan under a heavy load. He lived on Crucible, a planet that was less a world and more a sprawling junkyard in orbit around a tired orange star. His home was Sector 7G, a district of the massive Starfall shipyards where old freighters and derelict warships came to be torn apart for scrap. June was a salvager. His days were a rhythm of plasma torches and magnetic cranes. He would cut through thick hulls, his body braced against the weight of the metal, his ears filled with the scream of tearing steel. The rain, a near-constant acidic drizzle, would mix with the sweat on his face and the grime on his coveralls. It was hard, lonely work, and at the end of each shift, he returned to his small habitation unit smelling of ozone and old oil. His unit was a single room with a narrow cot, a small table, and a basic food synthesizer he almost never used. While other workers swallowed bland nutrient paste from the machine, June cooked. It was the one thing he did that felt truly his. Back on Earth, his Halmione had taught him that food was more than fuel. It was memory. It was comfort. It was a way to care for someone without using words. Tonight he was making kimchi bokkeumbap. The sharp, fermented scent of kimchi filled the small space, fighting back the smell of metal. He chopped spring onions with a careful hand and fried an egg, its edges crisping perfectly. As he ate alone at his small table, the only sound was the endless patter of rain on the corrugated roof. The food was warm and flavorful, a small rebellion against the grayness of Crucible. He looked at the portion he had made, enough for two, and felt the familiar, hollow quiet of his own company. After eating, he sealed his leftover rice in a container. It was a habit, though he didn't know why. He just always made a little extra. He decided to take a walk before sleeping, to clear his lungs of the day's metallic dust. He pulled on his heavy, worn jacket and stepped back out into the damp night. The yard was a canyon of shadows, lit by the flickering orange glow of warning beacons. He walked his usual path between mountains of discarded engine parts and stacks of hull plating. The rain had softened to a fine mist. It was then that he heard it, a faint skittering sound like small stones tumbling over metal. He stopped, listening. The sound came again, followed by a soft, high-pitched whisper. It was not the sound of a rat or the wind. Curiosity prickling at him, June moved slowly towards a large, gutted thruster assembly that was leaning against the wall of his own hab unit. He peered around its massive nozzle. There, huddled in a small space between the thruster and the wall, were two children. They were like nothing he had ever seen. Their skin had a soft, silvery sheen like the inside of an oyster shell. They were painfully thin, their limbs like delicate sticks. They had large, luminous eyes that seemed to take up much of their small faces, and these eyes were wide with fear. Two small, nub-like horns, no bigger than his thumb, protruded from their foreheads. They were clutching each other, shivering in the cold damp. The smaller one, a boy, had his face buried in the side of the older one, a girl. June's breath caught in his throat. Aliens weren't uncommon in the shipyards, but they were always adults. Traders, mechanics, other salvagers. Never children. And never children who looked so lost and so hungry. He took a small step forward. The moment he moved, the girl's head snapped up. Her large eyes locked onto his, and she let out a low, threatening hiss, pulling the boy tighter behind her. She was terrified, but she was ready to fight. For such a small creature, her defiance was sharp and fierce. June froze. He raised his hands slowly, showing them they were empty. He didn't speak. What could he say that wouldn't scare them more? His mind raced. They were hiding. They were starving. He looked at their sunken cheeks and the way their silvery skin seemed stretched too tight over their bones. The memory of the leftover rice in his container flashed in his mind, moving with a slowness that felt like a dream. He crouched down, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. The girl watched his every move, her body tense. He unzipped his jacket, reached into the inner pocket, and pulled out the sealed container. He placed it carefully on the wet ground, then used his foot to slide it gently towards them. It came to a stop a few feet from their hiding spot. He then stood up, took several steps back, and turned his side to them, pretending to look out at the shipyard, giving them the space and the choice. He could feel their eyes on his back. For a long minute, nothing happened. The only sound was the drip of water from a broken pipe overhead. Then he heard the faint click of the container being opened. He risked a glance, The girl had snatched the container and retreated back to the boy. She opened it, and the smell of the cooked rice and kimchi wafted out. The boy peeked out from behind her. Their fear was momentarily overpowered by a desperate primal need. They didn't have any utensils. They used their small, three-fingered hands to scoop the rice into their mouths, eating with a frantic, messy urgency that made June's heart ache. They were not just hungry, they were starving. They finished the entire container in less than a minute, licking the last grains of rice from their fingers and the inside of the box. The girl looked from the empty container back to June. The raw terror in her eyes had softened, replaced by a deep, bewildered confusion. She didn't understand his action. He had food and he had given it to them. He had not tried to catch them or hurt them. June gave them a small, slow smile. It felt strange on his face, which was more used to frowning in concentration. He didn't move from his spot. The girl stared at him for another moment, then grabbed the boy's hand. In a flash of movement, they were gone. They scrambled deeper into the shadows behind the thruster assembly, and he heard a faint metallic scrape like a hatch closing. June was left alone in the misty night, staring at the empty space where they had been. He walked over and picked up the discarded container. It was still warm from their hands. The reality of what he had just seen settled over him. 2 alien children were living in the ruins of the shipyard. How long had they been here? Where were their parents? He looked back towards the thruster assembly. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see a cleverly concealed access hatch, almost invisible against the patterned metal of the wall. It was their door. He walked back to his own hab unit, his mind no longer quiet. It was filled with images of large, fearful eyes and the sound of frantic eating. The hollow feeling in his chest was gone, replaced by a new, sharp sense of purpose. That night, as he lay in his cot listening to the rain, he didn't feel the crushing weight of his loneliness. Instead, he thought about the little boy and the fiercely protective girl. He thought about the empty container. Tomorrow, he decided, he would make mandu, the good kind with plenty of pork and vegetables, and he would make a lot more. The next day, the gray light of dawn found June already awake. The usual heavy feeling of another long shift was gone. In its place was a low hum of purpose. His mind was not on the ship he would be cutting apart, but on the small hidden hatch in the 2 pairs of large, watching eyes during his lunch break. While the other workers sat together eating their synth paste, June stayed in his corner. He pulled out the small insulated lunchbox he always carried. Today it was heavier. He had woken up early to prepare extra food. He opened it and looked inside. There were 2 containers now. One held his own lunch, a simple bowl of rice and vegetables. The other was larger, filled with soft, steamed mandu dumplings. He had carefully pleated each one, making sure the filling of pork and chives was sealed inside. They were still slightly warm. The plasma torch felt heavier than usual in his hand that afternoon. His eyes kept drifting towards the growing pile of scrap metal near his hab unit. He was counting the minutes until the shift end siren blared across the yard. When it finally sounded, he didn't go to the mess hall or linger to talk. He grabbed his gear and walked straight back to his unit, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He didn't change out of his work clothes. He simply picked up the larger container of mandu and walked outside. The rain had stopped for a moment, leaving the air thick and wet. He approached the giant thruster assembly. The space where the children had been was empty. He felt a small pang of disappointment. Maybe they were gone. Maybe he had scared them away for good. Then he saw it. A faint scuff mark in the grime near the hidden hatch. They were still here. He placed the container on the same spot as the night before, on a flat, rusty panel that served as a makeshift step. He didn't wait for them to appear. Instead, he walked about 20 paces away to a broken control console, its screen dark and cracked. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and started fiddling with its wiring, pretending to be busy. It was just for show. All his attention was focused on that container. He waited. The minutes stretched. Doubt began to creep in. Perhaps it was a mistake. Maybe they would not come. Then a movement. The hidden hatch slid open just a crack. A single large silver eye peered out. It scanned the area looking for him. It found him at the console, his back mostly turned. The hatch opened a little wider. The girl Hanol slipped out. She was as quiet as a shadow. In one quick, fluid motion, she snatched the container and darted back into the darkness. The hatch closed without a sound. A slow smile spread across June's face. He stayed at the console for a few more minutes, then stood up, stretched, and walked back to his unit as if nothing had happened. He did not look back. He did not want to pressure them. Inside, he ate his own dinner, the hum of purpose now a warm feeling in his chest. He had made a connection. It was small and silent, but it was real. The next day, he made John savory pancakes filled with sliced vegetables. He left the container in the same place and went to his fake work at the console. This time, the wait was shorter. The hatch opened after only a few minutes. Both children emerged this time. The boy, Bayol, stayed close to the hatch, ready to flee while Hanul retrieved the food. She paused for a second, her eyes meeting June's across the distance. She did not hiss. She just looked, her expression unreadable before disappearing inside. This became their new routine. June's life, which had been a flat line, now had a peak to look forward to every day. He would come home from work and prepare a feast for two. He made simple, comforting foods. Doenjang jjigae, a hearty soybean paste stew with soft tofu and potatoes. Tadeok baki, chewy rice cakes and a sweet and spicy sauce. He even tried making simple kimbap, seaweed rolls filled with rice and vegetables, though they were a little messy to eat with hands. He never approached them. He always gave them space, and he started to talk. At first, it was just murmurs to himself as he worked on the broken console. Tough day today. The hull plating on the old freighter was thicker than I thought. His voice felt loud in the quiet yard. Then, as the days went by, he began speaking directly towards their hiding spot, still keeping his distance. He kept his voice soft and low. "This is called kimbap," he said one evening as he watched Hanul take the container. "The black stuff on the outside is seaweed. From the ocean." The children gave no sign that they understood his words. They just watched him with those large, absorbing eyes. He told them about Earth. He described the green of forests, the vast blue of the ocean, things they had surely never seen on Crucible. He talked about his Helmione and how her hands could make the most perfect dumplings. He spoke of the noisy, crowded markets full of food and laughter. He was painting a picture of a world for them, a world of color and warmth, a stark contrast to their current life of rust and shadows. He was also learning about them. He learned to read their small, silent language. He saw the way Hanul's head would tilt slightly to the side when she was curious about a new smell from the container. He learned that a soft clicking sound from Bayol meant he was happy and content. He noticed that Bayol was more playful, while Hanul was always serious, always watching, always protecting. One evening, about 3 weeks into their silent ritual, something changed. June had left a container of hot, sweet porridge, a food for someone who is sick or needs comfort. He went to his usual spot and waited. Hanul came out and took the food, but she didn't go back inside immediately. She stood there holding the warm container. Then she did something she had never done before. She looked directly at June and gave a small, deliberate nod. It was a clear gesture. "Thank you." Then she was gone. June felt a surge of emotion so strong it almost overwhelmed him. That single, silent nod was worth more than any payment he could have received. The next day, when he went to retrieve the empty container from the previous night, he found a small object sitting on top of it. It was a piece of some broken machine, a fragment of crystalline circuitry. But it had been worked on. Its sharp edges had been smoothed away, and its surface was polished to a high, brilliant shine. It caught the dim light of the yard and refracted it into tiny, colorful sparks. It was beautiful. It was a gift. A token from Bayol. June picked it up. It was warm from being held. He closed his fingers around it and held it tight. He looked at the closed hatch, his heart full. They were no longer just starving children he was helping. They were Hanul and Bayol, and he was June. They were friends. The quiet rhythm of their days was shattered by the storm. It began not with rain, but with a deep electric hum that made the metal walls of June's HAB unit vibrate. The sky, usually a dull gray, turned a sickly shade of green. The air itself felt heavy and charged, pressing down on the shipyard. The comm system crackled to life with a terse, automated warning. "Ion storm incoming. All personnel seek immediate shelter. Secure all external equipment." June sealed his unit's shutters just as the first wave hit. It wasn't like the usual drizzle. This was a horizontal driving sheet of water, mixed with stinging particles of dust and ice. The wind howled like a living thing, shaking the very foundations of the structures outside. Lightning, a violent purple color, arced across the sky, followed by thunder that felt like it was punching the ground. June sat on his cot, listening to the chaos. His first thought, his only thought, was of Hanul and Biol. Where were they? Were they in that small hidden hatch? Was it strong enough to withstand this? The image of Biol's small, thin frame shivering in the cold damp was replaced by a much more frightening one. The two of them terrified, soaked, and freezing. He couldn't sit still. He stood up and paced the small room. The storm raged for hours. He tried to eat, but the food tasted like nothing. He tried to sleep, but every crash of thunder jolted him awake. All he could see were their large, frightened eyes. When a temporary lull finally came, the silence was almost more frightening than the noise. The wind had died down to a low moan, but the rain continued, heavy and cold. June knew this was his only chance. He pulled on his heavy enviro suit, the thick, rubberized fabric stiff against his work clothes. He sealed the helmet and grabbed a powerful hand lantern. He pushed his door open against the wind and stepped out into a world transformed. Debris was scattered everywhere. Small rivers of oily water flowed between the piles of scrap. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and wet metal. He switched on the lantern, its beam cutting a shaky path through the gloom as he trudged towards the thruster assembly. Their usual spot was flooded. Water was pooling around the base of the hidden hatch. His heart hammered against his ribs. He sloshed through the water and reached the hatch. It was slightly ajar, bent from the force of the storm. He could hear a faint, distressed sound from inside. It was a high-pitched, whimpering cry. "Hello?" June called out, his voice muffled by his helmet. "It's me, June." He carefully pulled the damaged hatch open. The beam of his lantern pierced the darkness inside, illuminating a cramped, low space. It wasn't just a hatch. It was the entrance to a small, damaged scout ship, cleverly hidden under a heavy tarp. The ship was elegant, with smooth, organic lines. But one side was crumpled and blackened as if from a crash. Huddled together in a dry corner were Hanul and Biol. Hanul had her arms wrapped tightly around her brother. Biol was shaking, his silvery skin dull and pale. His eyes were half closed, and his breathing was a shallow, raspy sound. He was sick, and he looked much worse than the first day June had seen him. Hanul looked up as the light hit her. Her face was a mask of pure panic. She hissed, baring her teeth, pulling Biol closer. But the hiss was weak, desperate. She was not just protecting her brother from a stranger now. She was protecting him from death itself. June's training in basic first aid kicked in. He raised his hands. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice as calm as he could make it. "He's sick, the cold. The wet," he pointed at Biol, then mimed, shivering. Hanul just stared, her body trembling. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She understood that he had come through the storm. He had not stayed safe in his shelter. June looked around the small space. His eyes fell on the ship's damaged exterior. A communication antenna was broken, hanging by a few wires, sparking faintly. So that was it. They weren't just hiding. They were stranded. They had crashed here and couldn't call for help. He knew he had to fix it. Or at least try. It was their only real chance. He pointed at the broken antenna, then at the sky. "I will try to fix it," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand. He then pointed at Biol and made a drinking motion. "I will get him something warm. Okay?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and waded back through the flood to his unit. His mind was racing. He grabbed a thermos and filled it with hot water from his heater. Then he took a packet of powdered miyakguk, a simple seaweed soup that was easy on the stomach. He mixed it quickly, the warm, salty smell filling his unit. He also grabbed his toolkit. When he returned, Hanul was in the same position, but she was watching the door, waiting for him. He held out the thermos. "For him, to drink. It will help." He carefully placed the thermos on the ground and slid it towards her. Then, without another word, he turned to the broken antenna. The storm was beginning to pick up again, the wind whipping at his suit. He ignored it. He used his tools to cut away the broken pieces. He found a spare length of conductive wiring in his kit and started splicing it together, creating a rough temporary connection. It wasn't pretty and it wouldn't hold for long, but if the storm passed, it might be enough to send a weak, repeating distress signal. Rain lashed at his visor. The metal was slippery and cold under his gloves. He worked as fast as he could, his breath fogging the inside of his helmet. He could hear Hanul behind him, coaxing Biol to sip the warm soup. After what felt like an eternity, he made the final connection. A small light on the antenna housing flickered from red to a weak pulsing yellow. It was working. Not well, but it was working. He climbed back down, his muscles aching. He turned to see Hanul holding the thermos for Bjol, who had managed to swallow a few sips. A little color seemed to be returning to his cheeks. The wind howled and a fresh deluge of rain poured down. June knew he couldn't go back to his unit now. He pointed to the dry corner of their hideout, away from the children. "Can I sit?" Hanel looked from his tired face to the flickering light on the antenna. She looked at the thermos in her hands. Then she gave a single, slow nod. June sat down with his back against the cold metal wall, his lantern placed between them. The three of them sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. The small space was filled with the sound of the wind, Biol's ragged breathing, and the steady drip of water. But for the first time since the storm began, June felt a sense of calm. He was no longer a distant helper leaving food on a crate. He was here in the dark with them, a silent guardian against the tempest. He had crossed the line from being their secret friend to being their protector. The days after the storm were quiet and slow. The shipyard was busy with repairs, but June's mind was elsewhere. He visited Hanul and Biol every day, his worry for the boy slowly fading. The warm soup and dry shelter had worked. Biol's strength was returning. His silvery skin regained its soft glow, and his playful, clicking sounds became more frequent. The temporary bond forged in the storm had become something stronger. They were no longer just his secret friends. They felt like his family. He was in the middle of cutting a sheet of hull plating when it happened. A deep, resonant hum began to build, not from the machinery but from the sky itself. It was a sound that vibrated in his bones. The foreman's voice crackled over the comms, but it was cut off by a burst of static. All around him, workers lowered their tools and looked up. The gray clouds of crucible began to tear apart, not from wind but from sheer overwhelming presence. Ships slid into view from behind the veil of the atmosphere. But these were not the blocky freighters or rusty salvage vessels of the shipyard. They were immense, sleek, and silent. Their hulls were a dark, polished metal that seemed to drink the light. They were shaped like daggers or sweeping wings, and they moved with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. More and more of them appeared until the sky was filled with them. They blocked the weak sun, casting the entire shipyard into a deep, cold shadow. They hung there, perfectly still and silent, in a formation so precise it looked like a diagram. This was not a trade convoy. This was an armada. This was power. Panic erupted across the yard. People were running, shouting, pointing. Alarms began to blare, their sounds weak and pathetic against the silent threat above. June's blood ran cold. His first instinctive thought was of conquest, of invasion. They were all going to be destroyed or enslaved. Then his second thought came, sharp and clear. Hanul and Biol. He dropped his plasma torch. It clattered on the metal deck, forgotten. He didn't think about the foreman or his job or the other workers. He started to run. He pushed through the confused crowds, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had to get to them. He had to protect them. He sprinted through the canyons of scrap, his lungs burning. He rounded the corner near his HAB unit and skidded to a halt. The thruster assembly was right there, and in front of it, standing protectively before their hidden ship, was Hanul. She was not hiding. She was not afraid. She stood tall, her small frame looking strangely powerful. Her large eyes were fixed on the fleet in the sky, not with fear, but with a fierce and hopeful recognition. She had pulled aside the tarp, and their small, elegant ship was now visible, its repaired antenna pulsing with a steady, bright light. A beacon. Biol stood slightly behind her, clutching the edge of her simple tunic, but he too was looking up, his small face filled with awe. June ran to them, his fear for their safety momentarily overwhelming his fear of the fleet. "Hanul! Biol! You have to hide," he said, his voice rough with panic. He reached for them, wanting to pull them back into the shadows. Hanel turned to look at him. For the first time, her gaze was not wary or confused or even just grateful. It was clear and certain. She held up a small hand, telling him to stop. Then she spoke. The words were strange and musical, but a small device on her wrist flickered and translated them into halting, basic galactic common that he could understand. "Do not be afraid," her small voice said, echoing slightly from the device. She pointed a slender finger towards the largest, most menacing ship in the center of the armada. "Our mother," is here. The words hit June like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mind refusing to process it. Mother? His eyes traveled from her determined face to the fleet of world-ending warships and back again. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying finality. The elegant ship, their refined features, their strange silent dignity. They weren't just lost children of some random alien species. They were royalty. Before he could form a single thought, a brilliant, shimmering column of light descended from the largest ship. It was a transport beam so clean and precise it looked solid. It touched the ground not 50 feet from where they stood. The light faded. Standing there was a woman. She was tall and formidable, dressed not in bulky armor but in a sleek, dark suit that seemed to be woven from shadow and starlight. It hugged a powerful, athletic frame. Her hair was pulled back sharply, revealing a face with the same elegant bone structure as Hanul, but etched with lines of command and a deep, chilling authority. Her eyes, the same large, luminous silver as her children's, swept over the scene. They held the weight of countless stars and the power to extinguish them. This was the matriarch Valeriana. Her gaze found Hanul and Biol. The stern, unreadable mask on her face shattered. A raw, powerful emotion flooded her features. Relief, love, and a pain so deep it was almost tangible. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees and sweeping both children into her arms. She held them so tightly it seemed she would never let go. She buried her face in Hanul's hair, her shoulders shaking. Biol clung to her, his small clicks now sounding like happy sobs. It was a silent, desperate reunion, a moment of pure private emotion in the middle of the terrifying public display of power. June stood frozen, a silent witness. He was just a man in dirty work clothes, standing in the shadow of a galactic empress. He felt invisible and incredibly small. Then the matriarch rose. She kept one arm around each of her children, but her eyes lifted, and they landed on him. The warmth and relief were gone from her face, replaced by that same unnerving, neutral mask. Her gaze was like a physical pressure. It scanned him, taking in his stained coveralls, his rough hands, his utterly ordinary human face. It was the look a queen might give a strange insect she found in her palace. There was no anger, no gratitude, just a cold, calculating observation. Hanul tugged on her mother's arm and began speaking quickly in her own language, pointing at June, then at the thermos and the empty food containers near their ship. The matriarch listened, her expression not changing. She looked from her children back to June. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. June's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He had no idea what was going to happen. Would she thank him? Would she punish him for getting involved with her children? Would she simply ignore him? A piece of scenery too insignificant to acknowledge? He stood there waiting, under the gaze of the woman who ruled the galaxy, while her armada darkened the sky above them. The walk to the matriarch's flagship was a blur. June was escorted by two silent, armored guards whose presence was more intimidating than any weapon. They did not touch him, but he felt guided by an invisible force. The transport beam was a tingling warmth, and when the light faded, he was standing in a place that defied understanding. The room was vast, so large he could not see the ceiling. It was dark, but points of light glittered everywhere like a map of the entire galaxy laid out around him. The floor was a smooth black surface that felt solid but showed the stars beneath his feet. In the center of this immense space was a single, simple dais. The matriarch stood there waiting for him. Her children were gone, likely taken to safety and comfort. The guards remained at the entrance, which had sealed without a trace. June was alone with the ruler of 1,000 star systems. The silence was absolute and heavy. He felt like a speck of dust in a cathedral. He stood awkwardly, his hands clenched at his sides. He expected a throne, a court, an interrogation. He expected to be questioned, accused, or judged. He was ready to be punished for his presumption, for daring to approach her children. The matriarch took a step towards him. Her boots made no sound on the starry floor. She stopped a few feet away, and her silver eyes, so like Hanul's but infinitely older, studied him. "June," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, translated by the air itself. She knew his name. He could only nod, his throat too dry to speak. "They told me," she continued. Her gaze was unwavering. "They showed me the food, the kimbap, the jjigae." She said the foreign words carefully as if they were fragile. "They showed me the gift my son polished for you." She paused, and for the first time her mask of perfect control seemed to develop a tiny crack. A deep weariness showed in the lines around her eyes. Their ship was attacked, she explained, her voice low. It was a political move. My rivals thought to break me by taking what I love most. They fled and their ship was damaged. They crashed here on this remote world. She said the words without malice, just a statement of fact. I have been searching for weeks. I had almost lost hope. June finally found his voice, though it was a rough whisper. They were very brave. The matriarch's eyes softened just for a moment. Yes, they were. Then her gaze intensified, pinning him in place. I rule 1,000 star systems, human. I command fleets that can snuff out suns. I have wealth beyond your comprehension. But I could not protect my own children. I could not find them. I could not feed them. She took another step closer. The air seemed to grow stiller. You did, she said, and her voice held a tremor of something powerful. You, a stranger. With no reason but kindness, you gave them food and shelter. You fixed their communicator in the storm. You saved my son's life. She looked at his hands, still stained with grease from his work. She looked at his simple, worn clothes. She was not looking at a king or a warrior. She was looking at a man who made lunch. I have seen empires rise and fall, she said. I have seen acts of great courage and terrible cruelty. But I have never seen a power quite like this. This simple decency. June didn't know what to say. He had not done anything special. He had just seen someone who was hungry and given them food. It was the most basic thing his Hermione had taught him. The matriarch turned and made a small, graceful gesture with her hand. A star chart materialized in the air between them. One star, a yellow sun, glowed brightly. Earth. From this day forward, the matriarch declared, her voice now ringing with formal galactic authority. Your world and all its people are under my protection. No harm shall come to them from any species within my domain. This is my decree. June stared, his mind reeling. He had not asked for this. He had not wanted anything. He had just wanted 2 children to not be hungry. The formal atmosphere shifted. The star chart vanished. The matriarch looked at him again, and now she looked like what she was, a mother infinitely grateful. They will want to see you, she said, her tone becoming almost gentle. They asked for you. They call you their friend. She led him from the grand chamber into a brighter, warmer part of the ship. They entered a room that looked like a garden, with soft grass and strange glowing flowers. Hanel and Biol were there, now dressed in clean, elegant clothes. They ran to him, not to their mother. Biol hugged his leg, making his happy clicking sounds. Hanel stood in front of him, her large eyes serious. Thank you, June, she said, her translator wristband glowing. June crouched down, his eyes stinging. He put a hand on each of their shoulders. You are welcome, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I will miss you. The matriarch watched them, a real, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. Who said you have to say goodbye? She asked. An ambassador is needed. Someone to represent humanity's interests. Someone my children trust implicitly. Weeks later, June stood in a bright, clean kitchen on a space station that served as a new diplomatic hub. It was nothing like his old HAB unit. This kitchen was large and filled with light. But the feeling was the same. He was teaching the matriarch's head chef, a very serious-looking alien, how to make kimchi. The chef watched carefully as June showed him how to salt the cabbage and mix the spicy paste. In the corner of the room, sitting at a small table, were Hanul and Biol. They were drawing on digital pads, safe and happy. The matriarch, Valeriana, stood nearby, watching the scene with a quiet contentment. June was not an emperor or a general. He was an ambassador. His power was not in weapons or warships. His power was in a simple lunch and a warm soup on a cold night. In the friendship he had offered to 2 starving children. He had started by making lunch for 2, and in doing so, he had forged an alliance that would change the fate of his entire world. He looked at the children and smiled. It was a good trade.